What's up? Welcome to Tales Tomorrow. I am Morrow, your storyteller for today, and with me we have some more RPG horror stories. At some point I do want to get the other ideas working, such as the live stream, and talk about homebrew, and then even cover my very own RPG.
Hello, what are you doing? Are you watching this idiot? Don't listen to this idiot, listen to me. I am the idiot you should listen to. This Friday, December 29th at 6 p.m. EST, we're gonna be doing a first proper stream on Tales Tomorrow channel. See you this Friday. Back to that idiot over there. Bye-bye.
Anyway, enough about that. Let's get to some RPG horror stories for today. Player tries to get me to stop another player using Skaven Speech for Ratfolk character. If you don't know what Skaven Speech is, it's a way that the Skaven, a Ratfolk-like race from Warhammer, talk. Here's an example.
The siege is set in motion, Lord Chief! The man-things will rue the day they tangle mess with the Skaven! Yes, yes!
I love the Warhammer universe, and I think the Skaven and the whole Skaven speech is very appropriate to them, you know? Skaven sort of capture that scampering rodent speech and dialect and the way they speak and stuff in a really clever way. I actually like it. Honestly, if I think of Ratfolk, I just think, oh, Skaven speech, just like that. A creepy, sneaking, stashing way. And then, you know, kind of use words like double up on words like yes, yes, and stuff like that. And it sounded like the scampering all the time. I was DMing a Pathfinder 1E game, and one player made a Ratfolk character. The Ratfolk player had recently played Warhammer on Xbox, and I thought that using the speech style of his Ratfolk would be an interesting way to flavor the world. I agreed, especially since Ratfolk is not one singular culture, and when adding roleplay style and quirks is always helpful, I say. So when the player voiced their character, he spoke like that. We will win, you will die. Well, another player got really annoyed at this. He repeatedly told the Ratfolk player to stop that Ratfolk didn't talk like that. Since there's no set rule for how Ratfolk or anyone talk, the Ratfolk player and I told him that it doesn't matter. If the other player has such a big opposition to like talking like this, and talking like that, and it's not like, you know, that's not Ratfolk speech, then can they give us an example of Ratfolk speech? If the other player knows like what the Ratfolk actually sound like, if there's like a more accurate, lore-friendly way that Ratfolk speak that he thinks would be more immersive, show it to the other players. This is not how the Ratfolk sound like. In Pathfinder, this is a good example, you know? But if you don't have an example, then let the player choose how they want to play. Every single character is going to have different quirks, characteristics, and some will even have, I guess, speech impediment. I don't know if what you consider with Skaven speech as an impediment, more like a pattern of speech. It's not really an impediment, it's more just a pattern. Unless you have a better example, then go ahead and show it to us. Show it to the class what the Ratfolk sound like. If you don't have the example, I think players should be able to speak with Skaven speech just fine. The other player took such an issue that he pulled me aside outside of game and asked me to tell the Ratfolk player to stop talking like that. I asked him why. Once again, his first excuse was, Ratfolk don't talk like that. I said, well, they can. Maybe some do. I like the flavor it adds to the game. Then he said, it's annoying. I get that some roleplay quirks can be annoying. I wasn't annoyed at this one at the time, but I felt annoyed at some people's roleplay choices. However, I think I'd rather play with some more style and quirkiness than not. It gets boring when every character in the world has the same accent. Edit. Many people in the comments have asked 2 questions, so I'll answer it here. 1. The Ratfolk player only spoke in that fashion while in character, and after the complaints even toned it down, to the point where they remained quiet most of the time and only used the voice a few times a session. 2. No other player took offense with it, especially with how much Ratfolk player limited its use. Most even said they enjoyed the flavor it added. Whenever players want to add a flavor to their character through a voice of all things, I think it's so cool. One of my best friends is playing a Kenku, and he's playing similar to like what the Skaven would, right? The speech has a little bit more like a crow cawing, and I love it. It just brings so much life and joy to the character, and it sounds flavorful and varied, and it just adds so much more. When people really can get into their character, even if they throw like a different twist to their character, like with speech mannerisms and such, and when everybody gets along with it and gets into the roleplay, it's great. It's awesome. It's like one of the most beautiful immersive things ever, and I love it. As a DM, I like the idea of having players be comfortable, and if they're comfortable to play the character the way they want to, that makes me as the DM feel accomplished, because I gave them a place where they can be the character freely and they can have fun. For the person opposing the Ratfolk speech, like, unless they can give an example of what Ratfolk are supposed to sound like, it just sounds like somebody just upset that it doesn't fit their canon narrative, which is really silly. Story for me, not for thee. How an owner's ego strangled a roleplay community. This is a follow-up story to Smells Like Fresh Bread series of posts about an online play-by-post Discord roleplay server that both of us participated in about 2 years ago. I'm the player Crow from his last post yesterday, and I thought a lot about what happened in this community, and Brett writing about it here inspired me to share my own perspective. This is a pretty long story, so you might want to grab popcorn. I've never read or seen the story by Brett, so I'm gonna assume that it's okay for us just to jump in the middle of it, and then maybe later on we can cover Brett's story. Start off with the sequel, and we can get back to the prequel later on if it seems interesting enough. Although they didn't use a proper system, this server had a few pseudo-systems that imitated the style and structure of a tabletop game without any dice or stats. Think of it as a West Marches campaign using only theater of the mind. The rules for operating in this environment were not very substantial, and most of it relied on trusting players and the mania GMs to do the right thing on their own. Unlike Brett, I was not a day one member. If I was, I don't think I would have stayed. I joined on a whim a few months into its life, right at the point when the community was exiting its infancy. I intended to lurk, but was given a good reason to change my mind. At the time, the leadership was planning to open a new seemingly evil faction for PC submissions. This concept inspired me to participate, as I saw an opportunity to tell an interesting story within its framework. Part of why I got hooked so quickly was how positive everyone seemed. Members gave each other a lot of support for writing scenes and participating in the community. After I had made my mark on the server, several players began to take interest in my ideas too. As a hardworking college freshman, the validation I received from this made this group an excellent escape from my classwork. There was a lot of hope in the player atmosphere, and I was happy to get swept up in it. So all was well, right? Unfortunately, it was not. Concerns about the overbearing GNPCs were already presented by the time I became active. The original police faction was led by a GNPC of the owners, we'll call him Shrimp, while the evil, or more accurately rebel faction was led by a GNPC of a moderator, we'll call him Bookworm. Bookworm's GNPC was fairly harmless and wasn't particularly overpowered aside from holding a MacGuffin. Whenever he was around, he had written as a down-to-earth leader who didn't hog the spotlight. Shrimp's GNPC, however, was portrayed as a larger-than-life, a one-man army who could single-handedly protect the police using a malleable MacGuffin and an ability list twice as long as everyone else's. Shrimp's scenes carried a lot of gravity in the server and seemed to serve as the crux of this narrative that everyone was to work around. Surprisingly, most members were okay with this dynamic. The common belief was that there was no main plot, and that this was a community where everyone could thrive in their own special way. It's not like the argument didn't make sense. The mock West Marches format ensured that plenty of characters got their chance to find or do something big, just like Shrimp. Those few players who disagreed and claimed Shrimp's GNPC overshadowed everyone else's contribution, all they had to do was go on adventures, share ideas, and naturally find a way to success without the need for Shrimp's involvement. At least that's how it should have worked. As somebody who came from a big server similar to like West Marches, I can tell you right now that finding stuff on your own, you're gonna have very little time to do. And the most important things you can do is help a GNPC like Shrimp's GNPC, because I can relate. A lot of story for the world that I was in would naturally come from the one DNPC that was around, and when you did do things for the DNPC, such as go around the world and go to north, south, east, west corner of the world, all you get after that whole trip is, thanks. And that's it. It was not rewarding in the slightest. My bitterness aside, let's continue. You could try to progress your character through conventional means, but you wouldn't get very far. One could have all the abilities in the world, but there wasn't a good reason to learn many of them when your fate in combat was mostly decided by how the participants felt that day. The server structure didn't leave much room for using those abilities as utilities either. You could also participate in dungeon diving to bolster your inventory, but like the abilities, finding a justification to use any of the items that didn't heal or wasn't a sedative was uncommon. The latter was GM and moderator favored for conveniently incapacitating any threat for as long as needed. In this community, there were only two sources of real power that put a character one cut above the rest. The first was possessing one of the MacGuffins, magical tools that both factions were fighting over. If you were lucky, patient, and told a captivating enough story, the leadership might consider giving you character one. The second was learning a signature skill, an ability exclusive to your character that served as a capstone for their character arc. To get one, you had to submit an ability concept, as well as a plan to obtain it, to the leadership team for workshopping. It was unlikely to be accepted unless the move was balanced and the plan of action was laborious. As I'm reading this, I'm spotting a lot of red flags and recognizing red flags that were in my own server that I basically kind of just dipped out of. We too were sent on a quest to get the MacGuffins or whatever, weapons from different planes of existence, but we had to make sure there's gonna be a laborious task to even get to that whole thing. And no character plot at all, just find a way to get there and go for that, and then find a DM that was patient enough to even run that sort of thing in the first place. It was a lot of work, but it didn't seem like it would have a lot of payoff. I mean, the last time we did any sort of main story quest, we just got an, thanks, you can go now, and that's it. No reward or nothing. So the other task of going to different planes of existence to get magical weapons of great power really did not give me any interest whatsoever. Neither of these were products of participating in a West Marches style gameplay. In reality, the only way of your character to stand a chance of having a true impact of the world was to spend months putting on a good show for the GM and moderators, then hope that it eventually deemed you worth of participating in the plot. Or in my situation, oh my god, or in my situation where the DM just wanted to have sex with you. Oh my god, things were so bad in my last game, dude. That sucks. Anyway, let's keep going. If you didn't put that effort in, your character would remain stuck as little more than a witness to the endeavors of more popular characters, or rather the character Shrimp and his friends elevated into the soap opera. Oh my god, is this a story about my server? Because we had the popular characters that basically did all the cool things and everybody else had to deal with all the consequences of whatever the popular characters did. Started a war with Drow? Everybody is in a war with Drow. Set the river on fire? It's on fire for everybody. This thing got broken? It's now shattered for everyone and no one can use it. They stopped the war with Drow? The war is over now, with nobody participating or having any sort of effect. I'm kind of wondering, is this about my old server? Just kind of some of the fine details changed entirely? Is that what it is? Or is it just a coincidence? With this kind of environment, it must sound like a wonder that I stayed as long as I did. It wasn't like I was blind to the warped core of the game experience, but I deeply cared about my own characters and the story I was telling with them, so I was willing to fight for a place in the narrative. From talking with other players after the fact, I found many of my peers were in a similar position. We invested so much time into playing out ideas, money into art commissions to give them life, and energy into engaging with the system demanding constant attention that it was hard to give up and leave. Plus, it wasn't like it was always awful. There was still good fun events and interactions to be had. But the more effort were invested, the more the server got worse. This author is after my very own heart. I relate to that in such a deep level. Let's keep going. Sorry for constantly interrupting. I'm just baffled with, as much as I'm reading this, how relatable this story is. Because I was also in like a West Marches-like campaign, and there were so many bad things that I was blind to. And a lot of it is very similar. I think, I don't know if this is direct reference to the server that I was in, or if this is a completely other server entirely. Like, the differences are so palatable. It's just crazy. It's honestly scary. Prior to its opening, the evil rebel faction was used by their leadership as an endless source of evil NPC characters for which episodic missions could be written around. However, most of the NPCs who were submitted to the faction turned out not to follow this trend. Instead, many were written as a misunderstood outcast or fighting for a noble cause that wasn't aligned with the police faction. It resulted in this morally gray order versus chaos dynamic that led to many unique interactions among PCs. This was an element of the server that I was really interested in. In fact, it was the idea that motivated me to join in the first place. All the core of this was Shrimp and Bookworm's GNPCs, who, power scaling aside, reflected the will of the factions pretty accurately. Okay, confirmation, it's not about my server because my server did not have like two factions fighting each other. Kinda did, but just not on this scale. This story is so relatable, it's unsettling, dude. I am spooked. But then Shrimp introduced his own character to the rebel faction, who immediately ascended to a narrative position equal to Bookworm's GNPC. This character was a blatantly cold-hearted monster who was so smart and powerful that he could do anything he wanted. It was just as world-warping as Shrimp's police GNPC too. Once he really took the stage, suddenly both factions couldn't care less about Bookworm's character. The police considered Shrimps a top threat, and the rebels lived in constant fear of what he could do. It's obvious that opening the rebel faction to players hasn't turned out as the leadership expected. What they wanted but never actually told the players was more blatantly evil characters that fit the mold their NPCs set out. I know this is the case because after I left, I learned they were planning to try it again by opening an even eviler faction where the submissions were required to be outright villains. At the time, even I could see how injecting Shrimp's GNPC as the rebel's face to force this black and white narrative was disrespectful to the storytelling decision of rebel players. It was especially disrespectful to Bookworm. Unlike Shrimp, Bookworm had ensured his character reflected what players were writing for the rebel faction. When non-leaders pushed their character to make less evil decisions, he relented. Despite this, and possibly because of this, Shrimp & Co. used the new rebel GNPC to sideline Bookworms. It wasn't enough that Bookworm's character was already a puppet to Shrimp's BBEG, a god with psychic powers unbeatably by literally everyone except for Shrimp's police DNPC, thanks to his signature skill being a perfect counter. Had to be replaced too, to ensure the faction dynamic was written exactly as Shrimp & Co. wanted it. Gee, retconning things just because the main guy wants to? Where have I seen that before? I should have said something about my dissatisfaction. My level of frustration got to the point that I wrote a personal vent page just to air out the many reasons, not all of which I've talked about here. Why I felt Shrimp's Rebel had upended what made the community so great. Still, I swallowed my complaints and wrote it off as a personal problem. The people running this were hardly older than me, most of them were inexperienced. They didn't mean any real harm, right? Everyone was just trying to have fun and character. Last thing I wanted to do was ruin their enjoyment in pursuits of mine. Surely I could just help from the outside, and all these problems would resolve themselves. The leadership can't be bothered to tell us things about the world that our characters would know, like the name of the planet we live on. I'll document all that information myself and publicize it so everyone can contribute. The visual summary is bloated and useless to new players. I can write a concise abridged version. Shrimp's Rebel is blatant villain and makes the story worse. I'll coordinate a storyline with Shrimp with a secret plan to help make him a more interesting character. Needless to say, I was in very deep when I first talked to Brett about this community. I was honestly shocked when during a voice chat in his own server, he told me about some of the troubling experiences he had. I'd buried my grievances through in my commitment to my character, but I know Brett as an exceptionally smart leader who had already run several successful roleplay campaigns. I couldn't ignore him of all people getting the short end of the stick. I entered our follow-up conversation with the notion that Brett had been unlucky. He lived in a time zone different from everyone else's. Because of unrelated circumstances, he'd been dealt with a bad hand. My solution was to use my favorite position among the community to right these wrongs, some way or another. But something happened around that time that completely changed my approach. There was a planning server with the leadership and a select few players coordinated scenes in private for future posting. For some reason, they kept its existence a secret to other players, despite its channel already being hidden behind roles to avoid spectators. At one point, Shrimp began hosting roleplay workshops, presentations to educate and advise players on how to operate in a server. At the end of one, he presented an invite to the planning server to everyone in attendance. Although Brett wasn't present for this event, he found a link while looking through publicly available slides after the fact. This seemed like a good thing. A planning server would trivialize the time zone problem. They could just organize scenes there and post them at a more opportune moment. Shrimp, however, gave a very lukewarm response amounting to, "That's not really what we do here." The next time Brett looked at the slides, one feature in the planning server had been deleted. That incident shattered my perception of the server. This wasn't any kind of incidental mistreatment fueled by honest mistakes. Shrimp deleting that slide was blatant retaliation for Brett finding it. We concluded that it hadn't been meant for him or any other struggling player that might have needed it. Learning of the planning server was a reward for the loyal people who happened to be in the right place at the right time. So not only are you letting the people that are committed in the know for things, anybody else that wants to get involved that just can't make it because of different time zones, they simply just don't get access to it and just being booted and removed and not included. That is crappy as hell, dude. That is so crappy. Why would Shrimp do something so petty against Brett? Before I joined, Brett had been a bit of a firebrand. He was much more vocal about his criticism of the server's design and treatment than other players, and his delivery tended to be on the blunt side. In his own community, players are open about issues and everyone works to resolve them maturely. He brought this culture with him into a server that did the opposite. Brett attributed this to the leadership team keeping him at arm's length. Strangely, Shrimp had been the one member engaging with Brett prior to this. He had offered to help him mend this gap. This event prompted both of us to look more deeply into the situation. Distressed by the thought that my friend in the leadership were forming the cliques that I had come to hate, I approached the member of the GM team with my concerns. Brad, meanwhile, tried to persuade some of the players who had left to understand what drove them to part ways. Over the weeks, we began to paint a picture of the truth. The excessive positivity that once hooked me turned out to conceal an underbelly of negativity. In the moderation chat, Shrimp had normalized bashing players that he and the others didn't like, and then quietly discriminating against them without telling those players there was a problem. Although the leadership was divided between moderators and GMs, Shrimp sometimes extended his bashing to chats meant for GMing, subjecting them to it as well. In private, Brad had been a particular target of Shrimp's. Most members didn't know about this roleplay achievement, so Shrimp was free to portray him as a worthless complainer and let the GM team stay away from him on his word. Despite the leadership disliking and even fearing Brad for this snappy criticism, to the point of not using the server role meant to ping players for in-server events specifically to avoid him showing up, nobody ever directly asked Brad to leave. Instead, Shrimp and Co. kept leading him on with false promise as a sort of bizarre punishment. He wasn't the only one facing the mistreatment either. For example, there was one player who got aggressive to the public channels because his attempts at engaging with the story had been left unanswered for months. After one of the moderators had already moved to calm things down, Shrimp approached him privately and lambasted him for acting out. Coincidentally, his PC was known for being a routine critic of Shrimp's policing GMPC. The moderation team punished this behavior which was spurred by him not getting the support he needed, by cutting out his character's involvement from a planned future event. This drove both him and other player to leave. If somebody's offering criticism, they're enjoying the thing that you're putting on, they just want to offer their perspective to try to improve it and make it better. Whoever looks at criticism and says, "Oh, you're offering criticism? You must be bad. You just want to besmirch my work." No, idiot. If somebody offers criticism, they want to see the work improve and be better. Because you know what's worse than criticism? Apathy. Nothing. Having no feedback, no interaction, no nothing. It's way worse than criticism. Criticism, at least you can work with. Apathy and nothing? You can't do anything with apathy. You can't do anything with nothing. But the one who received the worst treatment of them all had done even less wrong. This player, we'll call him Blade, was a day one member and a longtime friend of Shrimp. While in his server, he was extremely kind and constantly raised the mood of the community. Then one day, he suddenly disappeared. Brett and I learned through other friends that Blade quietly cut ties with Shrimp's community for the sake of his mental health. He sent a parting message to Shrimp, expressing that he was manipulative and caused him significant stress. However, Blade happened to still be a member of non-roleplay 500+ member server that Shrimp also moderated in. Shrimp retaliated by dedicating the next month to getting Blade banned from the other community, despite his message being private and having little to do there. Back in Shrimp's own server, he deleted Blade's character's emote, something that never happened even to those who left. And to explain what happened to everyone else, after the vague and imposing line, Blade is no longer a part of this community. Blade never returned to either server. I was relieved to learn that not all members of Shrimp's team agreed with this decision. More than one member had joined when they intend to right wrongs in the server, just as I did, but became jaded after coming face to face with Shrimp's true colors. Many members of the leadership agreed with my concern, but couldn't see a productive way forward. A few even vented to me about their own struggles with Shrimp. You know, funny enough, I actually joined in and tried DMing because the server we were jumping onto basically was bleeding DMs, and people there was just so much internal drama, and I was like, you guys need help? It seems like there's a lot of help. I was involved in a lot of like personal discussion with one DM and the other DM and the other DM, and it was kind of like a big he said, she said drama. I don't want to go into it too hard, but I saw there was a lot of problems, and that kind of made me want to like join DMing so that I could help with some things and offer some games that clearly were needed to be run and stuff. And that's where I learned about DMing and stuff, and learned that I really like DMing. But at the end of the day, if like the main guy that's running the whole thing is just not willing to budge and stuff, and if he is the root of the problem, it's only gonna get worse from there. You can't improve. If the main guy can't realize that there's a problem and doesn't listen to feedback, then like, what are you gonna do? If the server owner doesn't know what the hell is going on, then things are never gonna improve, and that's what ended up happening. As I took this information, my stance slowly shifted from distance of this server situation to a distaste of Shrimp specifically. I disliked his dry, sarcastic sense of humor that always seemed to belittle his friends more than uplift them. I disliked the suffocating presence of nearly every character he played. I disliked how he led me on, promising a MacGuffin for my character, not updating me on when or how he obtained it for a half a year. I disliked how he was never the one initiating when we coordinated plans, even after he claimed he liked my characters. Normally I just let all these things be, but now that I knew the full extent of the two-faced nature, I couldn't let all these slides slide anymore. That's why I decided to confront him in DMs. I fully laid out my feelings about him, offered an opportunity for him to show me that I had the wrong idea, that he realized what he was doing to me and the rest of the community was wrong. I would have forgiven him had he recognized that he had caused the players harm, apologizing and made at least a little effort to do better. I don't enjoy holding grudges. Shrimp's response was charged. He blamed Brett for wasting his time and never being satisfied. He blamed his team for the server's story pacing becoming slow and drawn out as the months went on. He blamed me for the imagining of the animosity between us. The only person he didn't attribute any responsibility to was himself. I know I regurgitate a lot about this post being relatable, but I'll just go with blah 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 blah, so relatable. The one person that's at fault doesn't see the fault in himself. Everybody else is the problem but me. It's the worst attitude to have in life in general. I tried to idle in a server for a while after that, hoping to come back one day. But after my experience, seeing anything from that community made me extremely angry. For my own health, I just quietly left. What happened after the conversation between us collapsed the community like a house of cards. The owner of the server Blade was banned from, we'll call him Bird, approached me because he wanted to know what happened to those private messages. Then another moderator of both servers, we'll call him Magician, approached me seeking the same thing. I shared screenshots with them, and it seemed to be the motivation they needed. Shrimp was already disliked in Bird's moderation team because Bird never agreed with the internal voice to ban Blade, but our interaction put them over the edge. In Shrimp's server, Magician, with the support of some of the leadership, pushed for Shrimp to step down as owner. He was not the first nor the last who bore the heart of Shrimp, only to receive a cruel response. It reflected a pattern of behavior that Magician considered unacceptable from a leader. Shrimp largely resisted this, going as far as to threaten deleting the server if he kept pushing the conversation. Shortly after this, Magician left the server in tandem with Bookworm. In Bird's server, the moderation team moved to ban Shrimp for his behavior and severed the relationship between Shrimp and Bird's servers. Shrimp retaliated by making a call-out document against Bird for conspiring against him, and now the situation was slowly fizzled out. Neither party was interested in escalating any further. Over those months, the server bled players. Counting myself and Bread, I know about a dozen players who left as a direct consequence of Shrimp's actions, whether that be his out-of-character attitude or his in-character storytelling. The majority were players, GMs, and moderators I'd consider an important part of the community as a whole. Shrimp's server is still around, but it's safe to say that it's past its prime. Shrimp did pass ownership onto somebody else, but from what I've heard from friends who are still there, much of his exclusive vision for the community had gone unchanged and unchallenged. The remaining leadership is trying to support players as best they can. There's only so much they can do to work in Shrimp's foundation. Many current and former members of the community splintered into offshoot roleplay servers. I know of at least 4 that were either directly motivated by the failing of Shrimp's server or feature many of the same players. Many former members have moved on better than others. Those who were in the deepest, like myself and some of the former moderators, are still in the process of healing in some ways. It's really a shame. Although it may not have been a horribly flawed server, I won't deny that there was a number of very talented and kind players. Between the lines of Shrimp's soap opera, there were nuggets of genuinely enjoyable characters and stories and themes. I can easily imagine a world where this server was a great place to be, but no amount of good players can save a community from a leader like Shrimp. Don't be like us. Pay attention to warning signs, and no matter how deeply you get, remember that there's no shame in bailing out. And that's a really good lesson. There is no shame in bailing out. Also, you don't need Shrimp to start your own thing. Start your own thing and just learn from what not to do. Don't be Shrimp. Start your own thing, invite your friends and your community, build your own community where you can have things that simply don't reflect what Shrimp is trying to do. That's what I'm trying with my own server, because I just want to play D&D, and I'm just tired of seeing a server be run down by a Shrimp. I guess you could say. I can relate heavily to this, because I guess in a sense, I too had a Shrimp in the other server, the Shrimp that didn't really see faults in themselves and thought that everything they're running is great and every single DNPC they make is overpowered and stuff. There's such a big reflection. I don't think it's because there's any sort of correlation. I think there's a kind of people out there that are not fit to lead because they make it about themselves. Don't be Shrimp. If you do start your own group or your own server, remember, don't be shrimp. Listen to feedback and look for ways to improve anytime you can. And with that, that's gonna be all our stories for today. I want to thank you very much for watching, and thanks so much for being here. If you like what I do, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Also, if the RPG Horror Stories ever goes down, or if you want to submit your own personalized horror story, email is down in the description below. I'll see you again in more Tales Tomorrow. Bye-bye.